you've got calcium deposits on most of your joints, so sparring is out.
I had that problem.
The early 2000s were a bad time for Sylvester Stallone professionally. In the mid-90s, after a short-lived resurgence with 3 hit movies, Cliffhanger, Demolition Man, and The Specialist, Stallone's career as a bankable action star began to sputter out of control, with Judge Dredd, Assassins, and Daylight all losing millions and millions of dollars. Copland, an indie drama directed by James Mangold, made money and earned Stallone his best reviews since the original Rocky, but his follow-up films were disastrous. His attempt at a slasher/horror movie, Detox, sat on the shelf for years, finally being released under the lame title ICU direct-to-video. His 2000 remake of Get Carter was another disaster, with critics eviscerating him for the temerity in remaking the Michael Caine classic, with even a cameo from Caine himself not easing their fury.
I want to give you a second chance.
In 2001, he teamed up with Cliffhanger's Rennie Harlan on a go-for-broke would-be blockbuster called Driven. Sporting a huge budget for the time, a lot went wrong with Driven right off the bat. Stallone had intended to make a Formula One racing epic, but eventually made it about the short-lived kart open-wheel racing organization. To put this into context, imagine Oliver Stone had made Any Given Sunday about the XFL instead of the NFL. The film flopped badly, which wasn't helped by the fact that the originally planned 3-hour epic was cut down to 2 hours, with some terrible continuity errors apparent all throughout the film. Indeed, the DVD has a whopping 51 minutes of deleted footage. For Stallone, it was an embarrassing failure and a movie he always says he wished he had never done. It was at this point that Stallone's career, for a while anyway, seemed essentially over. He starred in the direct-to-video mafia comedy Avenging Angelo and an indie movie called Shade, which also went direct-to-video. His highest profile role was as a villain in Robert Rodriguez's Spy Kids 3D, with Stallone mostly focusing on TV.
What I want, what we want, what do we want?
With him even showing up for 2 guest spots on Las Vegas opposite his old buddy James Caan, and he also had the reality TV show The Contender, which was relatively successful.
But they all have one thing in common: the desire to be a champion.
All in all, though, it was a bad time for Stallone's career, and it seemed like he would never recapture his former glory. But here's the thing: failure can sometimes be a great motivator, and as Stallone himself said in Rocky III, when you lose the eye of the tiger, you have to get it back.
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
If you're a huge fan of the Rocky saga, as we are here at JoBlo, it's not hard to figure out the fact that Stallone himself was becoming kind of more of an Apollo Creed-esque figure as his career went on. But Stallone had a plan. He put pen to paper and began to plan out a comeback vehicle where once again he'd play his most enduring role, Rocky Balboa. Indeed, the character had twice before saved his career from purgatory, with Rocky II, his post-Paradise Alley and Fist comeback, while Rocky III put him back on top after a slew of early 80s flops. Wouldn't be easy though. Stallone was no longer bankable. While all the Rocky movies had been relatively lavish productions save for the first, Stallone would have to make do with a relatively threadbare budget this time, just like he did in the first film, with a shorter shooting schedule than he was used to. But Stallone at this point was a pretty versatile director, so he was able to use the low budget to his advantage. The consensus among the studios at the time, though, was that given the fact that Rocky V was a flop, this series was all but done.
Nobody's expecting much, I think, from the way past his prime former champion, Rocky Balboa.
Stallone thought differently. Rocky V had never sat well with him, nor did the idea to retire Rocky due to a potentially fatal brain injury. After watching George Foreman become the oldest heavyweight boxing champion in history, Stallone began plotting Rocky's return. It took years for him to refine the story, and some hard choices were made along the way. The most grave of all these was the fate of Talia Shire's Adrian. Shire, of course, is still alive and well, and is actually still quite close with Stallone, with her always speaking very kindly about him. But as he was writing the film, Stallone realized that Rocky's comeback would be much more dramatic were he to have lost the one person who always believed in him, Adrian. As such, he reluctantly killed her off, something which gave the character a lot more pathos, and that he no longer has her to lean on.
I remember when she was standing there, all nervous and shy with this little smile. And all I wanted her to do was trust me.
He's just got Polly, with even his son Robert, now played by Milo Ventimiglia, taking over for the late-stage Stallone, not really wanting anything to do with his father.
You ought to come by the restaurant tonight. I can have something made special for you.
Tonight I can't. I got plans, a few of the guys.
In Rocky Balboa, some of the events of Rocky V were ignored, with Balboa no longer as financially downtrodden as he was in the last film. He's actually shown to be a successful restaurateur, owning an Italian eatery called Adrian's, where he regales patrons with stories about the glory days and his friendship with Apollo Creed.
You want to hear some stories?
What kind of stories?
Well, a lot of people like to hear these old fight stories, you know?
It's a satisfying place for the Italian stallion to end up. In the movie, Sly is lured out of retirement when the current champ, Mason the Lion Dixon, played by real-life champ Antonio Tarver, is ridiculed for never facing a true champ, just as what happened to Rocky himself in Rocky III.
He's never been in real knockdown, drag-out brawls. He's never had to dig down to rally back.
Dixon is infuriated by an ESPN simulation that suggests Rocky Balboa in his prime would have easily beaten him. His managers want him to get some goodwill back, so they challenge Rocky, who has managed to regain his boxing license.
That computer fight got people curious. This could be very interesting.
Yeah, but I ain't interested in getting, mangled and embarrassed.
Now, as far as the Rocky movies go, some great pains were taken to make this a little bit more three-dimensional. For one thing, Mason Dixon is not a villain, with him just perhaps a slightly egotistical boxer, and the movie never really pretends that Rocky could defeat him in a battle due to the huge age difference.
You want me to fight a guy that I can beat with both hands tied behind my back?
Everybody knows you could beat the guy sitting down.
But in the film, when Mason injures his hand, the fight becomes a lot closer than expected.
Dixon with brutal left-hand shot. Dixon hurt his hand there.
With Mason finally meeting an opponent with real heart and Rocky getting to let loose some of the stuff that's in the basement.
There's nothing more to prove, Pop. There's nothing more to prove.
I gotta go out the way I gotta go.
One thing that surprised viewers of Rocky Balboa in 2006 was how incredible the writing was, with some of Balboa's dialogue becoming much memed in the years that followed.
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
The fight scenes in the film were also stripped down compared to the bouts in the original series, with Stallone saying that he wanted to use more realistic sound effects in the fights to make them lower key and more realistic.
Here comes Dixon. He's exhausted. He's punching the man.
The film also offered the late Burt Young a great final turn as Paulie, with him showing more pathos than ever in his final entry into the series. And this is probably Paulie at his most likable, because let's face it, never the nicest guy, right?
Yesterday wasn't so great.
It was to me.
Not to me. You treated her good. You had the good times. I treated her bad. I don't have to think about this.
Plus, Geraldine Hughes gives a really good performance as Marie, the now grown version of the young woman who, of course, famously called Rocky a creepo in the original film.
I mean, this is who you are. You know, this is who you'll always be. And you don't move aside for nobody until you're ready to move.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
So when it came out over the 2006 Christmas holiday, Rocky Balboa, which box office forecasters had predicted would flop, wound up being a surprise hit. It grossed $70 million domestically, plus another $85 million internationally, on a modest $24 million budget. It made a lot of money. Even the critics who slammed the last few Rocky movies couldn't deny that once that classic Bill Conti music started up, it was hard not to once again get invested in the Italian stallion. Most notably, it kicked off a great career resurgence for Stallone, who wound up recapturing the zeitgeist in a way his contemporaries like Arnold Schwarzenegger have struggled to do. While he likely thought that he was done with Rocky Balboa after delivering a satisfying end to the saga, this did not prove to be the case at all when a young director named Ryan Coogler came a-knockin'. But of course, that's a story for another day. But as it is, Rocky Balboa is a very strong entry into the saga, and it finally gave Stallone a comeback that's worthy of him, so I give it 8 out of 10 Stallones.
Ain't nothing over till it's over.
What's that from, the 80s?
It's probably in the 70s.